hear from Alok, who left a very nice job in Google and joined a startup, RedBus. Alok.
Thank you everyone for coming here, and it's really good to see all of you, and I appreciate the chance of being here and getting a chance to interact with all of you. Over next less than 5 minutes, I'm going to share a little bit of my story of how I thought through about startup in terms of where to land at and what were the sort of frameworks that I used to get some clarity into my mind as I was taking this big decision for my life. I do hope that you might be able to use some of these frameworks for your own decision making, and it's just my humble way of thinking. So one of my mentors actually at some point of time of my life, when he was changing a job, told me that whenever you're making a job change, your next job change should not be with just that next job itself in the mind. You should always have the following job in mind, and you should always ask the question as to how this next job that you're getting onto is going to help you in terms of the next job that you're going to go to after this job. And unless you do that, you're not really planning your life. You're basically going by the situation, and you're just changing the job and not really directing your life into a structured sort of your vision, whatever you want to do. So with that advice, I consider myself to be very lucky when I got into Google as a product manager, because this was a company that provides an opportunity for learning at the fundamentals of the internet, how things work at a very, very key, deep grassroots level. And there, above all, I started working on search, which is the bread and butter of the internet ecosystem. Businesses are made and broken on how well you're ranking on search. So I got a chance to understand search at a very, very deep level. And then the good thing in the company was that the internal mobility in the company was encouraged quite a bit. So you can expand the profile as much as you want based on your interest and capabilities. So I started taking over more and more responsibilities around mobile. That gave me good understanding of mobile, and that's a big trend in India at this point of time. So it was a good learning overall. And then I was thinking what to do next. I said, if there is one skill which is left out from the internet ecosystem, it is knowledge about ads. So then I moved to Google Mountain View, and I said, okay, let's work on ads. And then I spent 2 years working on display ad network, where I got to understand how all the other websites out there which are not owned by Google actually make money. What are the things which go into making money? And that gave a very good overall perspective into how things work at the internet level. And now the question was, what next? Obviously, the reason I got it, I was so considering myself lucky after getting into Google was because I did want to get into a startup. And Google was a stepping stone towards that startup, as I said. The next job, Google was going to provide me all the learnings for getting into the next following job, which was around the startup. So I started asking questions myself. Now is the right time, obviously, given the age and all these kind of things. I thought this is the right time to get into. If not now, then never. So the first question that I came up into my mind was, where? Where should I get into in terms of the startup? Should it be India or it should be US market? And there the inspiration came from a book called Outliers. I don't know how many of you have read that book, but it's a beautiful piece of work that analyzes about success. What are the sources of success? And that sort of points out that success is about IQ and your intelligence, but a lot of factors of your success actually depend on the context in which you were. Yes, Steve Jobs was very successful. He had amazing intelligence, but a lot of the credit actually goes back to his father, who was a car mechanic, and he taught him the art of making beautiful products. And the access that he used to have to computers when he was just a growing child. How many of us had that kind of access? So a lot of your success actually depends on the kind of things that you go through in your life as you are achieving your goals. And if I look at people in the large companies who have been largely exposed to the Western markets, I consider all of them to be very lucky. Because here these people have got exposure into so many awesome technologies, all the bleeding edge technologies, how technologies are built. These guys understand all of this stuff. And they have seen how these technologies have been deployed in the Western world to solve the real problems. And at the same time, all the Indians working in these kind of companies also have exposure to the Indian market, where there are so many inefficiencies. You just walk around a kilometer and you'll find 10 efficiencies that you can optimize on. And that is the context that is being provided to us at this point of time. And that's where, and entrepreneurs actually create wealth out of the inefficiencies. And if we are the ones who have been exposed to these awesome technologies and the opportunities in India don't create wealth at this point of time, then history is not going to forgive us. So I thought India is the right place to be. This is the place which provides opportunities for next several years, if not decades. And as Sharad was saying in the morning's keynote, 15 years down the time, if there is one reason which can, if there is one thing that can eliminate poverty, it is the product-based innovation coming out of India. And I sincerely believe that. It was amazing to see that opinion from Sharad. I completely agree with that viewpoint. And with that viewpoint, the first question got answered. It has to be India. So now the next question was, if India, then what kind of startup? How do we go about picking the startup? And there I used following two frameworks. And the kind of startup that you pick is extremely important because, man, you're committing your next 4 or 5 years of your life on a startup, and if you end up making a wrong decision, you are going to suffer. Either you're going to suffer for those 4 or 5 years and not make anything, or you're going to quit midway and it's going to reflect bad on you. So you must make the right choice. So I used two frameworks in that. First framework was based on the business fundamentals of the company. So I divide startups mainly into two kind of startups. One kind of startups are more of the speculative startups, where the company basically takes maybe a Western business model and tries to replicate it in India, or maybe it's a Me Too company or something like that. I don't think it'll be hard for you to imagine these kind of companies in your mind at this point of time. There are tons of those examples. So those companies are basically being built because if you execute faster today, then tomorrow somebody will acquire you at 50 million, 100 million, 500 million, whatever valuation might be there. And then there are other kind of companies who have got very sound business fundamentals. Companies which are solving a real need of consumers, bringing amazing amount of customer loyalty, and solving a real pain point that nobody else has done in the same way or in the right way. And these are the companies which are sustainable. These are the companies which are going to be there for next 5, 10, 15, and maybe even longer number of years. So which of these two kind of companies you want to bet for? And the mindset of the individual is going to be completely different. So you have to basically assess your personality, and you have to basically assess which kind of company you want to go and work for. And that is the first framework that I used for picking up the company. I decided that it has to be latter because I want to sort of build more onto the differentiations and solve the real pain point of the customer rather than playing the speculative and the valuation game. Second framework that I used in my mind was, at what stage of the company do I want to get into? There are 3 stages that I broadly see, and the way I classified the companies or the startups when I started looking out. The first kind of companies are the very, very early stage, or even potentially the companies that I can potentially start with few of the friends. So these are just 2, 3, 4, 5 people strong. Maybe you might get a co-founder level status, or maybe you might be the co-founder itself, that kind of stuff. Second is the companies which are in the roughly the middle tier. Companies which have figured out the business model, companies which know what to do, companies which have figured out the recipe, but they're just waiting to become really big, scale up to a great extent. And then the third is the companies which can potentially actually cannot be called as real startups. They already become big. They have figured out the model. They are at the verge of hockey stick curve, and they're already reasonably big in size. So the question was, which stage do you want to get into? And each of the stages, the risk is completely different, and you have to have the right gut. At this point of time, you have to sort of assess the capability, what sort of mental mindset you have, what kind of lifestyle you want to live. Are you fully on board with that kind of business model or not? There are 50 questions which go into answering which of these 3 stages do you want to get into. And I basically decided that it has to be either the middle tier, where the company is medium sized, or it has to be the early stage. But for early stage, I didn't get a good team, I didn't get a good co-founder, so I ended up getting into this middle bucket at this point of time. So this was sort of my journey. This is how I ended up at RedBus. There's one last thing that I want to leave you with, which is what were sort of the factors which were holding you back from taking this big decision. Guys have got fantastic salary at big companies, right? It's very, very difficult. So what I call this is, it's kind of a phantom fear in the mind. And those fears come from questions, boss, how is my lifestyle going to be after I join a startup? And these kind of questions make you think harder, and you end up not making any decision. At the end of the day, you do have to take a call, you do have to take a risk. And actually, if you really go back and look at the maths, if you're living a reasonably modest lifestyle, your expenses are not that high. You don't really need that much money as you're getting from all these big companies. You can survive with a small amount of money, but actually can have a much more fulfilling life in the next few years. One of great investors, Kamal Rekhi, once said, most entrepreneurs actually live a life that most of the other people would never love to live, but for a long period of time, but afterwards they live a life that nobody else can afford to live. And that's a very, very deep statement. I mean, you have to be prepared to live a life that is not lavish for next few years, a modest lifestyle. But then after that, the lifestyle that you can have potentially is something that nobody else can afford. Right? So that's the sort of conviction you need to have in yourself when you venture into the startup world. And the time duration you should keep is significantly long. It's not a 1 year, 6 month, 2 year journey. All of us who have entered into this world do feel that it is 4, 5, 6, 7 year kind of journey. So keep that sort of time frame in mind. So these were my sort of thought process that I went through about a few months back. I joined RedBus only 4 months back, so it's still quite fresh memory. Thank you.
Thank you, Alok. And now we'll hear from Pankaj.